The phenomenon of migration is characteristic of humankind since its inception. Whether fleeing war, seeking food sources, or avoiding natural disasters, people have always been on the move. Today, people move faster and more cheaply than ever before, but not without political challenges. As more and more people move from rural to urban areas across the globe, or within countries of the global south, or from the global south to the global north, governments and citizens find ourselves asking new questions about what it means to be a citizen. What are the rights of new citizens? What are the rights of newcomers? What are their responsibilities? What is a just relationship between governments, between newcomers, and a just relationship between newcomers and current citizens? These are the questions that governments are asking themselves every day, and certainly the immigration debate in the United States has been no exception. Because migration has existed since the dawn of time, people of faith enjoy clear guidance from Scripture about these right relationships and many of these questions. We are told in the Old Testament and the New Testament that we have a responsibility to welcome the stranger. CRS seeks to live out this mission every day across the globe. We see the faces of these migrants, whether they're fleeing war or persecution, whether they're simply seeking a better way to provide for their families, or whether they're moving for some cultural reason. And as Catholics, we're asked to consider this human face of migrants. Many people look at immigration purely from an economic perspective, others from a national security lens. But the Church calls on us to consider, first and foremost, the dignity of migrants and how to respect that dignity. Moreover, as Americans, it behooves us to understand that the United States policy sets the standard globally on how other governments treat migrants and refugees. For Catholic Relief Services, it's easy to see the human side of migration or refugee issues because we see these people every day. Whether we're working with Somalis in refugee camps in Kenya who've fled the famine of 2011, or whether we're working with Afghans in the highest mountains of their country, people are fleeing every day, and we're working to support them. You'll see here a picture of two young women who are Iraqi refugees currently living in Cairo. The young woman on the left is 18 years old, and she's finished high school. She was able to attend high school because of tuition assistance provided by Catholic Relief Services. But she doesn't know what to do now. Her father has no right to work, and it would be very difficult for her to have access to tertiary education. She doesn't know what the future holds for her. She's tried to commit suicide twice. Iraqi refugees are one population that Catholic Relief Services is trying to assist, and we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. So these refugees are struggling economically, but they fled initially for political reasons. These are several reasons why people migrate. So let's first look at the economic reasons. People are compelled by modern economics to flee for work. Whether they're moving from a rural area in Mexico where they can no longer sell their corn at a reasonable rate and thus moving to the city, or whether they're moving from one country to another, many people cannot find work where they currently live. Many farmers in Mexico struggle to compete with the global companies who are now putting corn and other resources into their environment. Those multinational companies have achieved economies of scale that simply cannot be matched by local producers. CRS is working with them in many environments, including in Mexico, by helping farmers to form co-ops. With these co-ops, farmers can band together and produce a consistent amount of product to sell on the market to regular consumers of their product. We also work to help them improve the quality of their product and to obtain the maximum price for it. Even in some of the most remote parts of the globe, the current global economy and the increase in trade has impacted how people earn a living. Last fall, I was in Bamiyan province in Afghanistan. It is in remote highlands that are nearly inaccessible in the winter because the roads are very bumpy and simply not well constructed. Because of the lack of access and because of droughts over almost a decade, most of the Hazara men must leave annually their town to find work elsewhere. Many of them work in Iran. They go every year to work with Hazara people in Iran, and so there's a cultural component to this migration. They go to an area where there are others of the same culture. This has simply become a fact of life for many of these people. But since CRS started working in the community, we offer basic road construction and other projects that help these men find alternative ways to feed their families. So economically, they are finding alternatives to their work, and this changes not only the economic structures of their community, but also the social structures. In a similar neighborhood, a simple project like a greenhouse can change the way these families eat and improve their food security such that the men need not travel. As many as half of the families no longer have to travel in winter in Afghanistan. By creating these sustainable alternative livelihoods, Catholic Relief Services provides alternative to migration, usually for the poorest of the poor across the globe. Yet for some people, alternatives are not viable, or they are migrating for other reasons, perhaps to reunite with family members. These migrations are high risk because of the outdated political systems of most countries across the globe. While we live in a 21st century economy where goods and services flow freely across borders, people cannot flow as freely. Most governments, including that of the United States, do not have as many visas as other people would like. So for people from the global south seeking to migrate to the United States to find work in construction or as nannies, it's nearly impossible for them to come legally into the United States. There simply aren't enough visas. Our visa system is outdated. That's the case across the globe, whether we're talking the European Union or somewhere in Australia or somewhere on the continent of Africa. Because people cannot migrate legally, they often take long journeys through dangerous places to find other ways into countries where they can find work. In the United States, that may mean passing for 3 days across the desert, where they must carry up to 4 gallons of water and risk not only the natural elements, but also exploitation by people who may sexually assault or rob them. Similarly, Africans flee towards Europe on boats that often capsize, or they may be interdicted by pirates or others seeking to exploit them. Clearly, this is not a sustainable or dignified way of finding work for family members. And this is why the church is seeking not only an economic solution, but also a political solution for most immigrants. In the United States, we are working not only to improve the visa system so that it is updated to today's migration, but also seeking to improve U.S. foreign policy so that it is more just. But for those people currently falling through the cracks, many become victims to people who prey upon them, human traffickers. Millions of people every year are trafficked for labor or sexual slavery, and sometimes there's no way out. The United States has led the fight to combat trafficking, and Catholic Relief Services is working in advocacy to ensure that we continue to lead that fight. In addition to prevention, protection of victims, and prosecution of perpetrators, Catholic Relief Services really focuses again on establishing alternatives to migration. In 2011, the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act is up for reauthorization, and Catholic Relief Services is working to ensure that despite the challenges of the current Congress, that bill is reauthorized to ensure continued protection for victims of trafficking and programs to prevent further victimization. Another major reason that people flee is due to threats to their families or themselves based on their religion, ethnicity, nationality, political belief, or membership in a particular social group. These people are called refugees, and despite international protections, their lives can prove very difficult. In 1951, the UN Refugee Convention was signed, and the United States has been a leader in receiving refugees annually. This tradition must continue for the humanitarian needs across the globe, and lately CRS has been particularly focused on the needs of Iraqi refugees. We spoke earlier about 2 young Iraqi women living in Cairo who don't know what the future holds for them. They are 2 of nearly 4 million refugees and displaced persons who are still trying to make their lives find some sort of normalcy since the civil war in Iraq in 2006. At that time, tensions flared. Shia and Sunni families once lived peacefully in neighborhoods together, but after the civil war in 2006, spurred by the U.S. invasion in 2003, Shia and Sunni families and communities were torn apart. Many people fled because they were personally persecuted or because they feared that they would be the next on their block to be persecuted. Even today, more than 1.7 million people are internally displaced within Iraq, and nearly 2 million people live as refugees in the Middle East. Most of them are in Syria and Jordan. Many Christians fled to Lebanon, and wealthier families fled to Egypt. But even for families who fled with means, living off of those means without the ability to work over the last 5 years has meant that they are now living day to day. In Syria, Jordan, and Egypt, Iraqi refugees have been received as guests according to Arab hospitality, but their rights are very limited. In most places, the men cannot work legally, and so at times women are able to work informally. But this has significant impacts on the social dynamics of the family. The government of Jordan has been particularly hospitable, welcoming Iraqi children into schools. Catholic Relief Services partner in Jordan, Caritas Jordan, serves over 100,000 Iraqis there every year, providing assistance like backpacks so that kids can go to school. Caritas also provides winterization assistance, such as blankets and stoves for cooking in the winter, psychosocial support, and most of all, medical assistance. Iraqis enjoyed excellent medical facilities in Iraq and have struggled to find the same kind of appropriate treatment outside of Iraq. They suffer from diseases similar to those that we suffer, including diabetes. And so this is a gap that Caritas and the U.S. government are seeking to fill for these refugees. In Syria, the situation is even more bleak. Many of the refugees who fled to Syria are seriously impoverished, and so providing basic rental assistance is one of the main foci of Catholic Relief Services work. We partner with the Sisters of the Good Shepherd and the Sacred Heart Sisters to provide basic assistance. The Sisters of the Good Shepherd have a shelter in Damascus for women who are victims of domestic violence or need other kinds of protection that they can't find outside of the shelter. 2 young sisters nearly fell victim to trafficking in Damascus, and immediately afterward, their mother sent them to this shelter hosted by the Sisters of the Good Shepherd. As the Arab Spring continues to spread and meets significant struggle in Syria, it is unclear what might happen to the Iraqis there. Whether they will flee to a third country, it's very possible that many will. It's very unlikely that most of these Syrians will return to Iraq. And so this is the question that the United States has to grapple with today with Iraqi refugees. With nearly 2 million still living outside of Iraq, what is their permanent life going to be? Must they continue to live in Egypt, in Syria, and Jordan as guests without right to work and any real future? How many of them will finally give up on the hope of a lottery ticket to be resettled to the United States? The United States is one of the very few governments who continue to receive Iraqi refugees. Most European governments have stopped. Moreover, countries are providing less and less assistance to those refugees, who often rely on international and national assistance because they cannot work. So the advocacy team of Catholic Relief Services invites you to continue to work with them to ask the U.S. government to meet our responsibility to these Iraqi refugees. For some, for whom it will be safe to return to Iraq, we ask the government to facilitate their voluntary repatriation. Although many can never return to the homes where they once lived in integrated neighborhoods, the Iraqi government can provide a way for them to receive compensation for their homes and start anew. The U.S. government should continue to press diplomatically for voluntary repatriation. The U.S. government should also increase the resettlement numbers to 25,000 a year so that more refugees can, in fact, find new life and hope in the United States with the rights to work. Thirdly, we must continue robust assistance to UNHCR, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, and host governments. This is so not only for Iraqi refugees, but for refugees the world over. In 2011, the biggest debate on Capitol Hill is around national debt, the deficit, and appropriations for the next 10 years. But we can never put a dent into that debt with the small amount of money that goes to foreign assistance every year. About 1.6% of our budget annually goes to foreign assistance, and less than a third of that goes towards poverty-focused and humanitarian accounts, the kinds of accounts that provide assistance to refugees and migrants across the globe. And yet, leaders in Washington think that we can cut foreign assistance because there aren't many Americans who fight for it. This will be the critical fight in the government until December of 2011 and beyond. And so we hope that you will join us in making this fight and urging that the U.S. government continue to provide assistance for those who are on the move and trying to find a new life in a new place by asking for the protection of foreign assistance. The Catholics Confront Global Poverty campaign will continue to update everyone on how to do that work, and we invite you to regularly be in touch with your senators and members of Congress and ask them to protect the foreign assistance accounts.